All right, time to check and see if this is working. Yes, I think we are a go. So, thank you everyone for joining me for that premiere. That was super fun. And I see people introducing themselves in the comments, which is perfect. I'm going to try and juggle the chat going on one side with the live stream over here. First of all, hello everyone. Does anyone have any specific questions about the process, or should I just launch into talking about it? It's also really fun to see everyone that we have from all over the world. We've got Belgium, we have New Brunswick, Canada, we have Germany, and I definitely know some of the rest of you guys are in the US. So thank you so much. I know that this time zone didn't work super well for our friends over in Australia or New Zealand, that whole part of the world, but I couldn't really, I can't please everyone. So I'm doing what I can. Kira says that my audio is cutting in and out. Is anyone else having trouble? Oh, Mona, you're in Denmark, because I also am in Denmark. I'm in Copenhagen at the moment. So, hello. Can everyone hear me? Audio is fine. Okay, so it seems like it maybe is cutting out a tiny bit. I am in my basement, where the reception is maybe not the most ideal, but everyone else seems to be having okay audio. So awesome. Thank you. All right, cool. So I guess I will just jump right in. Hello, Finland. With some of the process of making this robe, kind of starting at the very beginning, and that is making the sort of squares that would go together, because it was, I think, while it wasn't the longest part of the process, it was probably the part that was sort of the trickiest, because I knew that I wanted, I didn't want the sort of quilt work where it was a really repeated pattern, where it was visually, you would look at it and you would see an identifiable pattern. So, and if you look at the original robe from the film, you can see it's kind of like that. It's very, it looks sort of pieced together very randomly. So I wanted to kind of emulate that look, but at the same time, I've only done a tiny bit of quilting, but I know that I kind of needed them to all end up eventually in sort of the same sized homogeneous squares to go together well. And so finding that balance of sort of several modular sizes of pieces that would go together to make those larger squares, which ended up being about 8 inches or so across, that was definitely a definitely challenging project. So you can actually see the dimensions written down in the video. Those are actually not the final dimensions, because once I got all those pieces cut out, I looked at them and I was like, these are tiny, and I am going to be sewing this robe forever. So I then kind of actually upsized them a little bit, just to kind of save some time and my sanity as well. So hello everyone who is joining a little bit late, and welcome. Just talking a little bit about the process of making the robe. Obviously, if you're just joining me, you probably haven't seen the actual video where I film the process and the whole reveal. So please feel free to hop over and watch that afterwards. But thank you for joining me live. So once I had all those sort of different squares and rectangles figured out, yay mathematics, then it was just a process of cutting them out, and that was fairly straightforward, other than the fact that it took forever. But something that I did kind of want to touch on, which I thought was super cool, was just the whole concept of using the Buy Nothing group, because that was actually a really kind of integral part of this process. I don't have a very large stash. I have almost no stash when it comes to fabric that was bought in an actual store. And I do have, like you saw, those 2 big bins of fabric, and that is all fabric that is either pulled from a recycling center, because we have really cool recycling centers here, but a lot of it is also just flat out pulled out of dumpsters, or maybe someone was giving it away as part of a like free on the side of the street house cleaning sort of project. So that was kind of fun. But it still wasn't like enough fabric to make an entire robe out of, or at least not a very visually interesting robe, because I had only, a handful of colors, some very interesting textures, but still it wasn't, I really wanted like a big variety of fabric. So that was when at that point I was in Copenhagen, but we had a couple months off between contracts, so I actually flew back and spent a couple months at home with my parents, and that is where they have this really nice Buy Nothing community in our neighborhood. And what it is, basically, it's just a community where it's a Facebook group. It's all based around Facebook, and you have to join based on your geographic location. So anyone in my particular Buy Nothing group was only within a very small radius, as the whole point is not only to recycle and save things from the landfill, but also to build a sense of community and get to know your neighbors in a way that's kind of lacking now in modern day culture sometimes. So I flew back home and I joined up with my Buy Nothing group, and I put that post, as you saw, just kind of asking for not being picky, just does anyone have any leftover fabric? Because I know that there are plenty of crafters and quilters and sewists out there that have rather immense stashes and are sometimes looking like Kira, I think she said, just did to kind of de-stash some of their hoard. So I put that post out, and it just got this most amazing response, and some of it was like super touching. Like there was one person who really wanted to give me this wool coat that she had picked up in Nepal years ago, and she said, I don't wear it anymore. It was like a really important keepsake from that trip, but I haven't worn it. It's very thin. Like, I would love you to have it. Please make it part of this robe. I think it's a very worthy goal for it. And then, also just like recycled clothing and little bits and pieces. And it was great because, there was no size limit. People could just give me the tiniest remnants, and it didn't matter. Could just make it all into anything. Yeah, Angela here says Buy Nothing is awesome, and it absolutely is. And Kira says she's doing it also with knitting yarns. So I mean, if you guys are in an area where you have a Buy Nothing group, if you've never heard of it, I highly recommend to check it out. I use it for actually a ton of things, both giving and receiving. You saw at the end of the video, I put all of the fabric that I had received, as well as a lot of my old stash from when I was much younger and living with my parents. I had hung on to a lot of that fabric and also some leather scraps. So I put everything into those 2 garbage bins, bags, and gave them away. And that was not staged for the video at all. Like, I really gave all of that fabric away. And actually, it was kind of nice because when I posted it, it was at the very end of my stay with my parents, and I was flying out in a couple days. And so I put the post up and I said, I have a bunch of free fabric. Who could use it? Ideally, I'd like to give it away all in one kind of big batch, because I'm flying out in a couple days and I don't really have time to sort of sort it out into a bunch of different piles to give it to a bunch of different people. I would have loved to, but I just didn't. I didn't have the time. And actually, the person who came and picked it up, Audrina, I ended up giving it to her because she did offer. She said, hey, I have a bunch of time. I will take it all, and then people can contact me, like, just right under here, and I'll kind of redistribute it for you. So that was actually why I ended up giving it to her, because she was then able to pay it even more forward, which was actually kind of awesome. So that was that bit. In terms of working with the fabrics, that was obviously an interesting challenge, because the one time that I did do any quilting, it was with a very, classic quilting cotton. It's all the same weight. It behaves very nicely. But this was definitely a challenge because I had almost any fabric type, thickness, weave, stretch, not stretch, you name it, other than maybe like spandex. I had it in this robe. So I had, the thin quilting cottons. I had something that was probably polyester, like very thin, that was the one that was very wibbly. But then I also had some like super thick cashmere scraps, some felted bits. I had a lot of knitted fabric, so like old sweaters that were knitted, which I then stabilized so they wouldn't unravel. But then that also added even more bulk to the seams. So that was a super interesting experience, not only sewing it together because everything needed to be pinned just to kind of for a minimum of stability, but then also mostly in the ironing process because I actually don't know what the proper quilting etiquette is. Like, I'm sure there is a correct way if you're supposed to press all of your seams open or if you're supposed to press them all in one direction. I'm sure someone in the comments here actually can let me know if we have any quilters. At least I'll tell you what the pattern was I'll tell you in the Discord later because I don't actually have the pattern. It was McCall's pattern, but I'll throw the number for you in the Discord later. So yeah, ironing it all was super interesting because of course I couldn't use too high of a setting because then that would melt some of the fabrics. And I tried to press all of my seams open because that was giving me the cleanest result. But then there were just some combinations of fabric that could not be pressed open. Like if I had a very thin fabric and it was joined up with a super thick or stiff felted fabric, for example, there was no way that seam was going to get pressed open. It had to be pressed in the direction that kept the thicker fabric flat. So that was like this whole interesting challenge, just working with all these weird different textures of fabric and joining them all together. And then you can kind of saw in the end there, once I got them all into these like sort of larger squares where they were finally all the same size, I had to then trim them back down a little bit further because they weren't actually perfectly the same size. And I swear I tried to respect all the seam allowances and sew it pretty good, but like just, I sewed, I have the number here. I had sewed more than 1,700 squares went into this robe. So there were a ton of squares and there was just no way that I was able to keep them all the same size. So once they kind of got together into these larger squares, I kind of looked at them and I said, the only way for me to like manage my sanity and have a good final product was going to be to trim them down even further. So then I made I kind of found the smallest of my squares, like what were the smallest dimensions, and I just made a cardboard template for that and then used my rotary cutter, which we had a fairly extensive conversation in the premiere about how amazing rotary cutters are, and they absolutely are. I hadn't used one very much, hardly ever before this, and that's probably why it took me almost a month, maybe 3 weeks into this project to suddenly be like, oh, maybe I should see if someone has a rotary cutter. And if you are going to do a project like this, and it seems like some of you are interested in it, please get a rotary cutter. Like the Brickaloos said, be careful. Don't abuse it because you can also give yourself carpal tunnels. Like, take frequent breaks, stretch out. But I think that would also be true of using a scissors. Like, scissors can be also very hard on your hands and your wrists. So just, this is a very repetitive process. So be aware of that and take care of your body. I fortunately was able to spread it out over the course of let's say a month and a half, maybe 2 months. I was still cutting some pieces up, but I would highly recommend a rotary cutter if it works for you, or if you have one that you can borrow and try it out. It made it go so much faster for me, and definitely that last step, like trimming all of those squares down to be equal size, it was highly it was so helpful. Like, I don't think I could have done it without doing that one final trim before I started sewing, the squares into those strips. And yeah, people in the comments confirming both that rotary cutters are amazing, but also that some people are no good with the rotary cutters, and that repetition, no matter what tool you're using, is hard and rough, and it's true. Just take care of your body, and there is for sure a learning curve, I think, with using them. There are still just some people are going to just never prefer it, and that's fine. I think whatever the best tool is the one that helps you get the job done, not the one that helped me get my job done. So, take this with a grain of salt. Your mileage may vary, but if you have never tried them before, I would see if maybe a friend or someone in a Buy Nothing group near you has a rotary cutter that you could borrow. I thought it was actually super amazing that the person who responded to my comment happened to be the mother of one of my old friends. That was super funny. I had no idea she was in the group, and then she answered, and I was like, I know that name. I know where you live. So yeah, and then we got reconnected, and I had this nice long chat, and she showed me her garden and sent me home with all that basil, which Maya, I hope your mac and cheese was delicious, because my pesto was absolutely delicious. There's nothing quite like fresh pesto with the basil. Just checking in with the yeah, Angela, I agree with you. I can also only use the rotary cutters with quilting rulers. Like I have not tried to freehand it around curves, although someone else was mentioning that they need a smaller blade to go around curves, and that would probably help to have the smaller blade for those tight curves. And I do highly recommend the like the translucent like plexiglass or anything like plastic that's see-through. That was super helpful for me in terms of rulers, because actually what I did was I kept those cardboard squares and I would just tape it to the underside of the plexiglass ruler so I could see exactly how wide I needed to cut out my strips as I was cutting them. I did fortunately only have 2 different widths, and then I had 3 different heights. So, I mean, it was a little bit of juggling and complicated stuff to do, but, nothing too bad. Yeah, so that was there. Like I said, it took, I was probably working, I don't know, like I wasn't going crazy. I was juggling a lot of projects at the same time. So I was probably working like maybe 3 to 5 hours a week on it, just focused on this. I think there were definitely weeks where I kind of cranked out a little bit more, especially as it started to get closer to the deadline, because this, while this video is only just released now, I actually had to finish the whole project and film and edit the reveal for the Costume Symposium 2021, which was in August. And so I had to get that all put together and sent over to Bluffluffle's channel. She was the one who hosted the whole collaboration that got this going. So there were a bunch of us out there that put together all these different fantasy bounding outfits. There's a ton of Hobbitcore content in there, and I have actually linked it in the description from the original video. So if you want to see some other fun Hobbitcore sewing projects similar to mine, definitely go check that out, because it was really fun, and it was really fun to get to work with, chat with at least, and get to know some of the other participants from that video. So that was really fun. But yeah, as that deadline drew closer, I was like looking at it and going like, okay, we're gonna have to be focusing a little bit more on this specific project before that deadline happens. Yeah, and the rest of it was like pretty straightforward. I used a McCall's pattern, and it was so nice to just follow a pattern. I don't know, I have this thing where I kind of feel like I always have to draft stuff myself, or even if I use a pre-made pattern, I'm always like wanting to alter it to be like super unique and custom fit. And it was kind of nice, honestly, to just be like, okay, thank you for confirming the pronunciation. It was super nice to just like lay back and be like, you know what, I'm just gonna use this pattern straight out of the envelope. I did not do a mock-up. I probably should have done a mock-up, considering how much time went into making the fabric before I could even cut it out. Like probably 90% of the work was just sewing all those squares together. And then once I finally got to the point where they were sewn together into these chunks of fabric big enough to cut them out, then it was like, okay, well, most of the work is done. Are you sure you don't want to make a mock-up? But so I looked at the dimensions of, and I kind of went, well, maybe I would be more a size small on this chart, but I don't want to do a mock-up. I'm just going to do a size medium. And it's supposed to be loungewear. It's okay if it's like a little bit baggy and flowy. And I just didn't have the energy to go through a mock-up. So fortunately, it turned out well, and I did, like you saw as I went through, I did sew the lining layers together and kind of do a few test fits as I went along before I did any super critical cuts of the quilted outer layer, just to like make sure that if there was like a vital something that I really screwed up, that I could catch it in the lining layer first. And there actually was one big change that I did make, and that was there are in the original pattern, there are 2 darts like right on the bust. And I should have gone with my gut, because just looking at them on the pattern, I was like, those are really chunky darts. Like, those are really big darts. There is no finesse happening anywhere in there. And I was like a little bit unsure about them. And then I sewed them into the lining layer, and they weren't amazing, but they were like, okay. And I was like, okay, I really don't want to have to modify this pattern. Can I please just keep it as it is? And so I sewed the darts then into the outer the outer fashion fabric layer, and I hated them. They looked horrible, probably because that fabric is so much thicker. It has all those seam allowances in it, but trying to sew a dart in it, it wasn't laying flat. It wasn't puckering, but it was like kind of pokey. Like, first of all, it's not a very graceful dart to begin with, but like, I'm pretty good at sewing darts. They're not usually a problem for me, and it just was so ugly. At this point, I think there are probably some people in the chat who are also in the CosTube Discord who might remember that was the point at which I put some photos in the Discord and said, I hate these darts. I think I can just sew them without the darts and modify the pattern like so and like so. And fortunately, a couple people confirmed like, yeah, that should be fine. So I did that. I like ripped out all the stitches. Fortunately, none of that fabric along the dart area scarred very heavily, so you can't really see it. But that was kind of the one big change that I did do. So if you are going to do a similar pattern, or at least specifically this McCall's pattern, I would recommend taking a look at that dart and seeing if you really want it, especially if you have if you're using sort of a quilt work fabric. And that actually kind of brings me to one of the last points I have, which is that this robe is heavy. That's actually why I don't have it here with me, right? I would be wearing it. Like, I don't have it with me in Copenhagen. It is across an ocean on a different continent, because it stayed at my parents' house because it was so heavy. I didn't have room in my suitcase to bring it back. And I mean heavy in a good way. Like, heavy like a security blanket heavy, not like in a bad way at all. It feels like a giant hug when you put it on. It's so nice, and it's very warm, and I did fortunately get to wear it some. I finished it in the beginning of August, which at least where I was staying was kind of almost heat wave weather. So I was actually really afraid, like, I'm gonna finish this garment and it's gonna be too hot to wear it. And actually, let me tell you that going out and filming that reveal, which it is, I think, almost exactly 1 minute in the final video, but I think I probably was out there for like an hour and a half filming outside, trying to just like get a whole bunch of shots, because I had literally only one shot to film it, and I was like, I need to film everything. Too much is better than not enough. So I was out there for like an hour and a half, and oh my goodness, I was so hot and sweaty by the end of it, because I was just drenched. It is very warm, but fortunately the weather did change. We had a little bit of a cold snap towards the end, the last like maybe week of my stay there, and I get up super early, so I'm often up at like 5:30 in the morning, and it was definitely like brisk enough outside to be pleasant wearing the robe. So I have worn it. I can confirm it is an amazing pattern. It is super comfortable. Just be prepared for it to be kind of heavy if you're going to make it out of in a patchwork style. And I think that probably goes for basically any patchwork garment. Like, you have so much extra fabric in there from all the seam allowances. There are so many, just like meters and meters of extra seam allowances with extra fabric. Even though I used a very small seam allowance, I think I was sewing at, roughly a 1/4 inch or so. Yeah, it was just still so heavy. Not to mention, of course, obviously it has long sleeves. I am short, so it goes like almost all the way down to the ground. Yeah, very heavy garment. But so that was it. Thank you guys for coming. Unless there are any other last questions out there, that'll pretty much do it. Angela says, I hadn't thought of the weight factor. Yeah, it's definitely like is a thing. It's quite heavy. Like I said, just think of it like a big hug. There's no downside to it, I don't think, unless you're trying to, say, fit it in a suitcase and fly transatlantic with it. But other than that, the weight shouldn't be like... It shouldn't be a thing. It's like, I think people pay a lot of money for, like, security blankets, weighted blankets. Could probably, cuddle Canal up in it, and when there's like a fireworks, and she'd be thrilled about it too. And yes, Bluffuffle, it is super cozy. And confirmation from Kira that she has done patchwork jackets before, and it can get quite weighty. I don't think there's any way around it. I think it's just like anytime you're doing any sort of quilt work, you can only trim the seam allowances so much, and there's just always going to be weight in there. And of course, also when you're working with like different textures, anything that's not, a super lightweight quilting cotton or anything like that. Phil, my partner, just asked when we're going to see this machine working and for me to use it on a project. I think that might be getting at the fact that he's actually been itching to fix it for quite a while, because I pulled it out of a recycling center. It is not 100% up to snuff. So yeah, hopefully soon, maybe, Phil, you can get your hands dirty and give me a hand getting it back up. If you make something patchwork, just watch how much weight you're putting on your shoulders. A waistband helps a lot. That's a really good point. I didn't even think of that, because of course I don't have a waistband, but I have the tie that goes around the waist. And that's the super solid point, that it helps really distribute the weight onto your hips. And it's actually interesting because I did watch, I think the solo artist, she made a very short video, not like a making video, but she did talk a little bit about when she made her robe. It's been like probably a year and a half or a year or so that I haven't watched it, so it's not fresh on my mind, but I do remember her saying that she didn't want to add a waistband. She didn't like the way that that classic robe waist tie felt, so she had like another solution. I don't remember what it was, but I want to say it's like a hook and eye thing around the waist. That's actually a really solid point, that wouldn't help spread the weight out nearly as much. Although her squares are much larger than mine, so her final garment is probably a little bit lighter, but even so, I think it's still probably fairly heavy. So really solid point, Kira, to think about if there's some way to distribute that weight on your hips. And we seem to have at least a couple people in the comments who are really keen for Phil to help me... switch the hand, fix that old singer there. So it's looking in pretty good shape. That was also a crazy story. We went to the recycling center, and there was not one, but actually two of these here. I took this one because it was in better shape. The one that we left behind was like really rusty. It was in nasty shape, and it looked pretty I'm pretty good at fixing things. Phil's also a very good tinkerer. But that one looked kind of like beyond help. We did grab some spare parts, just thinking like, oh, well, maybe we could like, if we need some spare parts, we have them. Maybe, and honestly, in retrospect, I probably just should have grabbed both of them, but also I'm trying not to be a complete hoarder. So fingers crossed. Maybe we can get this working. If it's interesting, maybe it'll be a video, or maybe it'll just show up like suddenly working on my channel. And those of you who watch this live stream will know that, in fact, this little story behind it. So yeah, Angela, that's a good part. To have maybe just a little bit of footage featured in whichever video it comes up in. I do need to get going on my 1890s Hogwarts cycling Quidditch outfit thing. That's kind of my plans for like January, February, when things slow down a little bit. Right now we're heading into the holiday season for me at work. We start doing the Christmas number. We have already had rehearsals for it. You actually saw that I have salvaged a lot of red velvet from the Santa costume. So our Christmas number is starting November 1st. That's when we put the Christmas number in the show, and we start to have like a ton of shows a week. So I think the Quidditch Hogwarts costume is going to be maybe slowly progressing, but quite slowly, until like hopefully January, February. I can sit down and get some like good solid chunks done on it. But in the meantime, I do have a couple other things. I have a couple videos that just aren't even edited yet. I have all the footage for one from like last year, and another one from when I was staying with my parents this summer. So those need to get edited. I also have a miniature fireplace that needs to get made. I have a 1940s air raid overalls onesie that is sitting in my changing room at work, waiting to be sewn together. So whole lot of things going on, but slowly. So I do not want to take up any more of your time. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It was super fun to chat with you, and vintage footage. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Katie. Exactly. It's going to be vintage footage when it finally gets out. So thanks guys, everyone. It was super fun. Thank you for making my first premiere and my first live a very pleasant experience. So I hope you all have some good crafting ahead of you. Have a fantastic Sunday wherever you are in the world, or if you're catching up with this later. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you later. Bye.